Dobro večer vam želim i dobrodošlicu na zatvaranje 7. internacionalnog festivala književnosti Bookstan. Naredna promocija je ujedno i posljednji događaj i žao nam je naravno što je tako, ali imamo i jednu utješnu nagradu prije postfestivalske depresije koja se obično dogodi na ovako 4 lijepa i intenzivna dana. Naime, u kinu 1. maj zajednički Warm festival kao naš prijateljski festival i Bookstan organizuju after party i svi ste pozvani i pozvane. Vidite kako sam ja to odmah rekla, da mi se ne bi desilo da poslije zaboravim, a mislim da itekako zaslužujemo malo opuštanja nakon vrlo 4 intenzivna dana, ispunjena vrhunskim književnim sadržajima, a duže od samog festivala traje Bookstanova radionica za mlade književne kritičare i kritičarke, koja je počela 3 dana pred festival, kao i svake godine, okupila izuzetne mlade ljude sa prostora cijele regije. Ovogodišnja voditeljica radionice bila je Jagna Pogačnik i sama radionica se odvijala pod nazivom Književna kritika između teksta i konteksta. Po svemu onome što sam čula i od voditeljice i od učesnika i učesnica, očigledno da imamo još jednu izuzetnu generaciju i mi smo vrlo ponosni na sve ono što podrazumijeva Bookstanov edukacijski program i na naše polaznike i polaznice, od kojih su mnogi postali članovi Bookstanovog tima, od Bookstanove direkcije do nekih drugih festivalskih segmenata. Mnogi od njih rade u različitim segmentima u polju kulture i zaista imamo razloga da budemo sretni što kontinuirano održavamo edukacijski segment. Ovogodišnji predavači i predavačice bili su Semezin Mehmedinović, Senadin Musabegović, Rada Borić, Tamina Šop, Marko Pogačar i Saša Ilić. Kao što sam rekla, voditeljica je bila Jagna Pogačar i ovo je trenutak kad Pogačnik izvini, neka se me ispravila i kao što rekoh, bilo je intenzivno ova 4 dana i ovo će biti prilika da saznamo ko je bio bolji od boljih i kako je protekao rad, šta to podrazumijeva književna kritika između teksta i konteksta i koliko su mladi ljudi neopterećeni kontekstom i koliko im to pomaže ili odmaže. Jagna, da ne pogriješim prezime, nek ostane samo Jagna. Hvala mnogo. Naravno. Hvala mnogo na ovom izuzetnom angažmanu i da čujemo tvoju završnu riječ kada je u pitanju edukacija i komunikacija sa ovim mladim ljudima.
Ja bih samo prvo rekla da ovo Jagna Pogačar nije prvi put. Došle su jednom knjige u Zagreb na moju adresu, a bilo je Jagna Pogačar. Onda sam nazvala Marka Pogačara i pitala čije su knjige i trebamo li ih podijeliti. Ali dobra večer svima. Evo, ja sam samo zaključno, već puno govorim, svaki dan me neko pita o ovoj radionici. Zaključno sam samo htjela reći da u ovom trenutku imam malo ambivalentne osjećaje. Znači, s jedne strane sam zaista sretna što sam sudjelovala na ovoj radionici. Mogu čak ovako iskreno reći da je to jedan od suvislijih projekata koje sam radila u zadnje vrijeme. Iznimno mi je drago da sam upoznala tih 20 doista fantastičnih ljudi koji su došli na radionicu. I nadam se da tu ta priča ne prestaje i da ćemo svi međusobno i surađivati. Evo ovako, mogu reći da doista zemlje koje imaju ovakve mlade kritičare ne trebaju brinuti o svojoj kritičarskoj budućnosti i doista evo mislim da je ta radionica jedan od, reći ću, važnijih dijelova ovog festivala iz razloga što je ovo sve divno i krasno i svi ovi etablirani pisci i sva ta sjajna imena koje ovdje dolaze su divna, ali da nema tih mladih ljudi koji dolaze na ovu kritiku mogli bismo biti zabrinuti, a mislim da je nekako budućnost književne scene kad vidiš sve te ljude s kojima sam radila, da za to nema neke veće brige. S druge strane sam naravno i tužna jer je sve to završilo. Mislila sam na početku da je to dosta dugo, međutim sad nam se čini da bi mogli još 1-2-3 tjedna da bi isproducirali i proizveli mnoštvo sjajnih kritika, vjerojatno bi u međuvremenu i osnovali neki portal i sve to bi mi radili, ali kao i sve lijepe stvari i ova mora završiti. Kažem, nadam se samo ovaj dio, a suradnja će biti i dalje. I treća stvar, u tim mojim ambivalentnim osjećajima, ja bih naime bila doista najsretnija da oni svi mogu dobiti neku nagradu i mislim da oni svi zaslužuju tu nagradu, ali eto nekako taj ocjenjivački žiri ili ocjenjivački sud, dakle Damir, Lamija i ja, odlučili smo se nagraditi 4 sudionika ove radionice i to vodeći se zapravo jednim glavnim kriterijem, jer inače bi bila potpuna zbrka, inače ne bi još 5 dana došli do konačne odluke. Dakle, procijenili smo da trebamo nagraditi one koji su se najviše približili tome modelu medijske kritike, dakle kritike koja danas, sutra može biti objavljena u novinama, na portalima i tako dalje. Dakle, to je nekakvo bilo naše zajedničko razmišljanje da oni koji su napisali nešto, odnosno napisali tekstove koji spadaju baš u medijsku kritiku, da nagradimo ovom prilikom njih. A sada je taj najteži trenutak. Ja tu imam jedan papirić, jer inače bih možda nešto i zaboravila. Reci mi samo kako želiš da ih prozovem, kojim redoslijedom?
Pa možda od 3. ka 1. i pretpostavljam da postoji i neka specijalna nagrada, uvijek žiri bude blagonaklon. I onda ćemo tu specijalnu posljednju.
Dobro, onda od 3. ka 1. Dakle, 3. nagradu je dobila polaznica koja, osim što je napisala odličnu kritiku, rekla bih da je bila mama i tata svim sudionicima ove radionice. Davala je prije svega meni, a onda i drugima sve vrlo korisne informacije od toga gdje da šta kupim, gdje da iskoristim bilo što. Sve naše goste je dovodila, budila je one koje je bilo potrebno, ali to je sve nevažno. Ja kažem, hoću reći zapravo da mi sad tu nagrađujemo književnu kritiku, ali u književnoj kritici su i neke osobnosti vrlo važne i te osobnosti se čitaju i u tekstovima. Dakle, nema ni književnosti, ni književne kritike bez života, to svi znamo. Dakle, vidim da se tamo cure već smiju i da znaju na koga mislim. 3. nagradu će dobiti, odnosno dobija Petra Bahman iz Zagreba. Drugu nagradu će također dobiti jedna djevojka koja je na početku radionice rekla da je dobila drugi put istog autora, pa smo je onda mi nazvali, kako bih ja to rekla, kaplanologicom i nadamo se da će jednog dana i njezina buduća znanstvena karijera ići u tom smjeru, da ćemo čitati neki doktorat. Dakle, djevojka s kojom sam rado dijelila cigarete, rakiju, razgovarala na radionici, izvan radionice, ona je Suzana Đuver iz Novog Sada. I sada prva nagrada. Kod mene uvijek ima neka priča, znači sve nekako prođe s nekom pričom. Mi smo jučer odlučili ko će dobiti ovu prvu nagradu, teško i tako. Uvijek je teško razdvojiti prvu, drugu, treću. I onda se zapravo jutros na radionici koja je funkcionirala tako da malo pričamo o tome kakva su iskustva, kako je to sve skupa bilo. Onda je upravo ta djevojka kojoj smo jučer popodne dodijelili prvu nagradu govorila prva, imala jedan iznimno emotivan istup i rekla je da dugo vremena nije bila u ovoj priči iz nekih njezinih osobnih razloga i da je na radionicu došla prije svega zato da vidi ima li za nju tu još uvijek mjesta. E pa, Zejneba Hajdarević, za tebe itekako ima mjesta. I tako smo došli do ove specijalne nagrade. Oni koji znaju da se ona razlikuje ni po čemu drugome, nego vjerojatno po nekim konkretnim stvarima koje polaznica dobije. Dakle, specijalnu nagradu će dobiti opet moram ukratko reći, djevojka koja je osim u svom tekstu iskazala izuzetnu sklonost zapravo analitičnosti, interpretacijama i ostalome. Evo, oni znaju već ko je. A ja sam njoj na početku, već drugi dan radionice, rekla kad bih ja dodjeljivala nagrade, dala bi ti nagradu za najbolju analitičarku radionice i ona je Emilija Vučičević. Evo, toliko od mene. Mislim da ne znam više što bih rekla. Znam, ali znam da nemam vremena. Hvala vam.
Jagna, hvala vama mnogo. Čestitke od srca svim dobitnicama nagrada. Prve 3 nagrade su novčane. Ova specijalna nagrada podrazumijeva godišnju pretplatu na sva Bajbukova izdanja i jer možda je, kad se preračuna, i vrijednija formalno i financijski od ove prve 3. Danas smo imali sjajnu promociju knjige poezije izuzetno mlade i izuzetne autorice Radmile Petrović, koju je njen urednik i moderator promocije Zvonko Karanović pitao da li bi podijelila neke savjete mladim pjesnicima i pjesnikinjama i ona je rekla kako ne trebaju propuštati radionice. Mislim da se isti savjet može primijeniti i za književne kritičare i kritičarke i oni to svojim dolaskom na Bookstan potvrđuju. Nama se i ove godine, ali i godinama iza dešavalo da imamo uslovno rečeno povratnike i povratnice na radionicu i nerijetko su isti ljudi dobijali nagrade i raduje nas i njihov kontinuitet u radu i prepoznavanja Bookstanove radionice i Bookstana kao važno mjesto za njihovo profesionalno formiranje i razvoj. Naredni i ujedno posljednji događaj je promocija romana Pričaj o bitkama, kraljevima i slonovima, koji je zasnovan na stvarnim historijskim fragmentima, govori o tome zašto se pričaju priče, zašto se grade mostovi i kako se na izgled različiti dijelovi, posmatrani sa suprotnih strana civilizacije, mogu ogledati jedan u drugome. Ovo sam pročitala zbog toga što se siže romana doslovno naslanja na ono što je koncept Bookstana. Ovo je festival o pričanju priče, o ljudima koji te priče pričaju i kao što svaki put podsjetimo kako je definisao Saša Hemon, naš suosnivač i prvi Bookstanov kurator, to je taj koncept no east i no west koji podrazumijeva da su u središtu samo ljudi i njihove priče, a nikakve teritorijalne i druge granice ne definišu one koji dolaze na Bookstan. Tako će biti i u godinama koje dolaze, nadam se u godinama koje će biti van stanja opsade i nadam se da ćemo iz godine u godinu biti u ovoj bašti ili nekoj drugoj, možda većoj, ali zajedno uz uživanje o pričama i pričanju. Uz večerašnjeg autora, Mathiasa Énarda, koji nam dolazi iz Francuske i koji je osvojio niz najznačajnijih evropskih književnih nagrada, upoznat ćemo i Margot Dikraft, koja je književna kritičarka i novinarka, trenutno predsjednica fondacije Pisci bez granica. Vjerujem da ćete uživati u razgovoru. Još jednom podsjećam na ono druženje u 23 sata u kinu Bosna ili kino 1. maj, svejedno kako ko zove. Hvala vam još jednom na dolasku.
It's better now, probably, yeah. Wonderful to have you here, because I didn't understand a word, actually. which makes it quite difficult. But I understand we have a lot of talents here, literary critics, young literary critics. I think that's the idea. And we have, of course, a marvelous evening, because we're now in the presence of a wonderful author from France, Mathias Énard. Thank you for being us. I'm always curious, who has read one title maybe of Mathias Énard already? Compass, for
Don't
instance.
ask that.
Or Zone. Compass.
Wow.
Yeah. Maybe the new book? Someone read the new book translated? No? Yes, yes. Okay. Who hasn't read anything by Mathias Énard? Okay, we have some audience to convince, I think, Matthias, also. You have to conquer your audience now.
Great, I will try to.
I have no idea if you have been introduced by this lovely lady, but I think so. Let me just say that I'm a big fan, so I'm a little bit extremely happy even to see you here in Sarajevo. It's my first time in Sarajevo. I think we met several times in France before.
We did.
So you have been translated into Dutch. So I read the book in Dutch. It's a beautiful edition. I think the new cover is more beautiful than the Dutch one, but okay. We're going to speak about Tell Them of Battles, Kings and Elephants, of course. That's the new book published here in Bosnia. Mathias Énard is a French novelist and academic. Are you still an academic? Because everywhere I look, it says writer and academic. Do you consider yourself more as a writer or as an academic?
Oh, I'm no academic. Or I used to teach at the university. I teach from time to time. But I don't write academic stuff from, I don't know, maybe 20 years, so I'm not really an academic.
So, well, we should change then. You're a writer. Full stop.
I'm a writer. I used to translate, so I'm a bit translated too, but that's it. Yeah, probably.
And, well, of course, you have been living in Barcelona for a very long time now.
20 years.
20 years already, wow. And actually you studied before you settled in Barcelona. You studied Arabic and Persian languages, and you lived for 10 years in the Middle East. But you were born in Niort.
I was
France.
born in Niort in France, yes.
Yeah, it's amazing. Being born in Niort and living for some time in the Middle East. Could you tell us a little bit of how your parcours was? What did you bring from Niort to the Middle East? It's a long story, of course.
What took me out of Niort to the Middle East? I don't know, life, what should I say? I grew up in a small town in the west of France. You probably don't know where Niort is, but you should. It's a small town, about 50,000 inhabitants in the west of France, near the Atlantic, somewhere between Nantes and Bordeaux. And probably if I'm so fond and interested in the Mediterranean and the Mediterranean languages and cultures, it's probably because I am the man from the north and I come from the Atlantic. And if Niort taught me something, it was probably a very deep urge to leave and see something else and discover new countries, probably, which is an advantage we have. The people who come from very boring towns that we want to discover the world, and learn languages and cultures. So that's what happened to me. I had the opportunity to go to Paris because at that time, when I was in my teens, I was fond of reading travelers and poets, and I decided that I wanted to see the world, not only in books, and I wanted to see the world, the real world. But when I finished my study, my baccalaureate in French, when I was 18, I discovered that there was like a kind of map for studies, and if I wanted to study, then I should go to Poitiers, which was about 50 kilometers from my hometown. So that was very small travel. So I decided to go to Paris, but to go to Paris I had to study something that I couldn't study in either in Poitiers or in Nantes or in Bordeaux. So I said, well, Arabic is great. Arabic and Persian was something that could not only take me to Paris, but then afterwards take me to Tehran maybe, or maybe to Beirut and some other remote places. So I went to Paris and I studied Persian and Arabic, and that's how my relationship with those parts, with the eastern part of the Mediterranean started in 1990, that is 30 years ago.
Actually, what strikes me is that a lot of characters from your work are leaving home and go very far away. That's not for nothing then, if I understand you correctly.
But they come back, you know.
They come back, yes.
There's this old story about Ulysses, you know, and the Homeric tales, Iliad and the Odyssey, were very important for me, for my writing, but also for the dreams I had when I was a teenager about what traveling meant. And then afterwards I realized that Ulysses leaves home, go to the war, spends 10 years fighting, then another 10 years traveling around the Mediterranean Sea, and he comes back to the same island. I mean, what the use of traveling after all those years of traveling and do the same to go back to the same island? But at the end, that's what happened with me, because my first books were about the Middle East, and I have a book about Russian, and I traveled myself a bit in Russia. Then I wrote about Morocco, Spain, and now my last novel is about my hometown. So at the end, I think we all come back in a kind of circle. Maybe it's probably the definition of travel itself is that you have the idea of the possibility to go back home.
Let's see a little bit, let's have a look at your work in a chronological order. Because you published in 2003, you published a book, indeed, about a young man who leaves. It's called in French, La Perfection du Tir. It's about a young man who leaves, and in a way, leaves home, who goes to travel a lot. How come that it was the time of the Arab Spring, of course?
No, that's Street of Thieves. That's another way. That's another novel. La Perfection du Tir.
That's your first novel, isn't it?
It's my perfection.
Yeah.
It's my first novel, but it's not about someone who leaves home. It's about the civil war.
A sniper in the
yes,
civil
the
war.
civil war in the Lebanon.
Yeah.
So there's no travel. It's in a town we don't know. It's Beirut, but the people who know Beirut will recognize the town. It's a city. It's about civil war in Lebanon, yeah. And it's about a young man, a young sniper, who during the day is a militian in his neighborhood, and at early dawn he goes up onto the roof and tries to shoot at some people on the other side of the line. And it's a very violent book. Sad one, but it's not really a travel.
Yeah, and then after that, because you have been interested in violence in wars for a very long time, because after that you published in 2008, you published Zone. Mm-hmm. It's a novel of nearly one sentence. It's a book about, it's a book of 500 pages. I mean, in one sentence, nearly. And it's really a journey of violence around the Mediterranean Sea. Was violence what struck you most in your travels at the beginning?
There's probably an event that really probably changed my life, even if I didn't see it that way at that time. When I was 19, I had the opportunity. I thought I wanted to be a journalist by then. I always knew I wanted to write, but I didn't know which relationship I had to writing exactly. I've always been writing poetry or short stories, but at that time, I wasn't sure if I wanted to write, let's say, creative stuff or more journalism or academic writing. So I had the opportunity to go to Lebanon at the end of the Civil War to accompany a photographer, a war photographer who had the possibility to be embedded by the Lebanese Red Cross. That was the first time they would admit journalists. So he told me, he knew I was young, I wanted to write and to learn, and he told me, well, what do you, don't join me, and we will do that together. So I went with him, and I spent a month traveling inside Lebanon at the end of the war with ambulances, with the Red Cross. And it was very, for me, it was I think my first discovery of many things, but above all, how war changes everything. Geography, relationships between people. For example, I discovered afterwards that two places that I thought in Beirut were like miles and miles apart were afterwards only 2 kilometers away. But during the war, we had to travel by night, like 2 or 3 hours just to turn around the town to go there, because it was mined. And so the country I saw, the Lebanon I saw by then, Beirut, when I turned 5 years ago, it was something else. It was totally different. For me, Lebanon was night, because we traveled a lot by night with the ambulances, because there was shelling during the day, but not so much at night. So we moved between the lines and inside the ambulances at night. And then I discovered that it was a country of light and of pleasure and of beaches. And I had never been to the beach in Lebanon. I slept inside in the Lebanese army quarters and beside the sea, but we didn't get the opportunity to bathe because there were soldiers, and it was totally forbidden to go on the beach. So because it was mined actually. So then you realize that the country you thought you knew is totally other. Yeah. So that was the first thing I know, that's during the war and violence, everything changes. The relations between the people were not the same. The relationship you had with someone you barely knew 5 minutes ago could become suddenly so strong that you thought that this person was your best friend for the rest of your life. And then it was something else, you know? So that's what I realized. And also I discovered that I loved the dialect, the Arabic dialect of the Lebanon and those parts of the world, and the Arabic literature and songs and culture. So that was for me very important too. And the first book, which I published in 2003, is about Lebanon, but it's about also what changes in war, about this young sniper. There's a love story, this impossibility to forget power in violence in war. So that was my first book.
And I think you also discovered the Persian and the Arabic literature, and you discovered that it was much bigger than you thought, and it was much more interesting maybe than you thought. In what way was that a real eye-opener for you?
Oh, for me, I think that when you start to learn something as deep and wide as Persian or Arabic literature, what you discover first, that you have to forget your European-centered state of mind and see that in other times, in other places, there were other languages who were much more important than French or German ever were. That Persian was written from Sarajevo to Burma, and that it was an ocean, an empire of a very, very strong and important language. And so when you discover that, you said, oh, but how come they don't teach me that at school? They don't tell me that the Ottoman sultans at the beginning were writing Persian verses. No one tells you that. No one tells you that in the east of Africa, for example, there were not long ago people writing the same pattern in rhymes and rhythm as the first poets of Arabia, you know. And so there's another geography, and it's like discovering something that you don't know. Well, we don't think that in Sicily, for example, there were so brilliant Arabic poets. Or Al-Andalus was something very, very fascinating. It was a wonderful crossroads of religions and cultures, but also a place, well, poets, you know that there are so many poets of Granada, but also of Valencia and Shatira, Arabic poets. That for me was a great discovery that changed my own intimate geography. I'm so sorry that I looked for them, but in my hometown, no, we don't have Arabic poets. Though the Arabs went to Poitiers, so maybe we could find something there. But you know what is very interesting is that when you begin to change a bit your way of seeing things
and your view on Europe probably also.
Of course,
yeah.
You see that Europe is much more mixed, and that the borders you thought were so clear, well, are not actually.
Let's speak a little bit, because that's the new book here, about the battle book.
And the elephants.
And the elephants, of course. But I read somewhere, I read somewhere that you, during the period that you were writing Zone, that you had to do something else in the afternoon.
That's right.
Could you tell us how, because that was the start of this new book.
Yes, I was living in Rome by then. I had the opportunity to have a kind of scholarship, residency for writers at the Villa Medici in Rome, which is a wonderful place, wonderful villa, and the Renaissance villa overlooking Rome. And I had a little house in the garden in the center of Rome, which was incredible. And I was writing a very, very violent book about kind of encyclopedia of wars around the Mediterranean. And so that was really tiresome. And in the afternoon, we had a wonderful library in the Villa Medici, a library for art and art history. And every afternoon, I went to the library, took a book at random, choose a book, and read it for a couple of hours, put the book back, and go back on the day afterwards and choose another one. And one day, I picked up the last, I think it's the last volume of the Giorgio Vasari's Stories of the Artists and the Architects. Vasari is one of the first historians of Storia dell'arte, of art history. And I read his biography of Michelangelo. And I read this line, and then Michelangelo received an invitation to go to Istanbul and work for the Sultan. And I say, what? Michelangelo received an invitation to go to Istanbul to work for the Sultan, the Ottoman Sultan? I said, and I don't know that? How come? So the day afterwards, I came back to the library, but I wanted to know more. But Vasari didn't say no more. So I looked, because I had this whole library full of art history books. So I looked and I picked up another biography of Michelangelo, which turned out, I didn't know that by then, to be a kind of autobiography, because Michelangelo himself dictated this to one of his disciples. So I read this book and I got a little more information. I knew that Michelangelo was invited by the Sultan to build a bridge. That this invitation was transmitted by monks, Franciscans, to him in Florence. And that's it.
There was no more information.
There was no more information. So I said, that's a fascinating story. I want to know more. And I began to investigate. And I discovered that there was no discovery because the historians knew it. But I discovered that they had also invited Leonardo da Vinci first. That da Vinci has sent back a draft for a bridge over the Golden Horn, and that this design arrived to the Sultans or the engineers in Istanbul, and they refused it. They said it's too complicated to build, it's impossible. And many things. And I began investigating about Michelangelo's possible trip to Istanbul. And for years, not 1 month, too much, no, but years, I knew everything about Istanbul at the time, 1506, everything about Michelangelo. Right now, I've forgotten everything about it. And by then, I knew almost everything. And I went to one of the biggest French historians of the Renaissance, the end of the Middle Ages, and the beginning of the Renaissance, and I asked him, do you think it's possible that Michelangelo went to Istanbul? Because the problem was, all the biographers said he received the invitations, but no one said what happened then. And then Michelangelo was back in Bologna, and then he reconciliated with the Pope and went back to Rome. I said, maybe he went. So I asked Patrick Boucheron, who's a very famous French historian. I asked him, Patrick, do you think it's possible Michelangelo went to Constantinople? And he said, no. And I asked him, why? We would know it. And I said, how come we wouldn't know it? But then it's the same. I will send him, no worries. And I decided to send Michelangelo to Constantinople and have him build a bridge, which was a problem because I had to figure out many things. Who would he meet? Where would he live? How? How would he go? And I imagined all that with lots of sources.
Then you became a real novelist at that moment, because your imagination started to work. I would like to ask you to read one page from the beginning, because for those of you who haven't read the book, it's excellent really to get acquainted to your style as well, because it's quite different from Compass, for instance.
I think it's the first time I read my own prose in English. And it's three bundles of sable and mink fur, 112 penny of wool, 9 rolls of bergamo satin, the same quantity of gilt Florentine velvet, 5 barrels of salpetre, 2 crates of mirrors, and 1 little jewelry box. That is the list of things that disembark with Michelangelo Buonarroti in the port of Constantinople on Thursday, the 13th May, 1506. Almost as soon as the frigate moors, the sculptor leaps ashore. He sways a little after 6 days of difficult sailing. No one knows the name of the Greek dragoman waiting for him, so we'll call him Manuel. We do, however, know the name of the merchant accompanying him, Giovanni di Francesco Maringhi, a Florentine who has been living in Istanbul for 5 years now. The merchandise belongs to him. He's a friendly man, happy to meet his hero of the Republic of Florence, the sculpture of David. Of course, Istanbul was very different then. It was known as Constantinople. Hagia Sophia sat enthroned alone without the Blue Mosque. The east bank of the Bosphorus was bare. The Great Bazaar was not yet that immense spider web where tourists from all over the world lose themselves so they can be devoured. The empire was no longer Roman and not really the empire. The city swayed between Ottomans, Greek, Jews, and Latins. The Sultan was named Bayezid II, nicknamed the Holy, the Pious, the Just. The Florentines and Venetians called him Bajazetto, the French Bajazet. He was a wise, tactful man who reigned for 31 years. He loved wine, poetry, and music. He didn't turn his nose up at either men nor women. He appreciated the arts and sciences, astronomy, architecture, the pleasures of war, swift horses, and sharp weapons. It is not known why he invited Michelangelo Buonarroti of the Buonarrotis of Florence to Istanbul, though certainly the sculptor was already enjoying great renown in Italy. Some saw him at the age of 31 as the greatest artist of the time. He was often compared to the immense Leonardo da Vinci, 20 years his senior.
Thank you very much. Well, you did that
thank
very
you.
well.
I thank you.
Yeah, beautiful. Beautifully translated also.
The translation is from Charlotte Mandel.
So now we get acquainted with this Bajazet and with the Sultan and
It's
with
Bayezid.
And with Michelangelo. You just told us that you know that he got the invitation, but
Oh, we know he got the invitation. That's
yes,
more or less historical.
But where started your imagination in the way he accepted it? Why do you think he accepted this invitation?
That's a great... because I know he was an ambitious man, and he was eager for knowledge. He needed fuel for his own imagination, for his own work, and at that time he had to leave Rome because he had a terrible argument with the Pope, and the Pope was his patron. So he was out of work. And if there's one constant in all Michelangelo's life, is that he was very, very eager for money. He wanted money and power and influence. So it was the story of the life of Michelangelo himself that told me that he could have accepted, because that was really something very important for a man like him at this moment in his career.
So he was driven by eagerness, by revenge also. He wanted to take his revenge.
Probably.
That's what you say in the book.
Yes, that's what I say in the book.
I mean,
that's
you who imagined this.
Yes, because, go work for the Ottomans. It's like for the Pope. The Pope just had a war with Bajazet a few years before.
Yeah.
So it's like working for the enemy of your enemy. It's like working for your friend at the end, So it's a good revenge for Michelangelo.
And of course, Leonardo da Vinci had an échec. That must have...
The failure of Leonardo must have been something for Michelangelo. He hated guts, really, Leonardo da Vinci, because Leonardo da Vinci had said that among the arts, sculpture was the less important. And that for Michelangelo, who owed his fame only to sculpture, for him it was really terrible to say that. So they were enemies. Well, Leonardo da Vinci, they never met. And Da Vinci was 20 years older, so he was already a legend when Michelangelo began in the career.
Now, of course, this bridge that he wants to, that the Sultan asks him to draw and to build, that's a very symbolic object, of course.
I didn't like that at first, That appeared in the text, and we had this drawing from Leonardo da Vinci for the bridge. But I thought, well, a bridge, it's like a bridge between East and West. And also, architecturally wise, it was not really interesting at that moment because they had so many technical difficulties with bridges that it was so limited at the end. So I said, well, he could build something else, like a mosque.
Yeah.
That would be great.
Why not?
Let's have Michelangelo build a mosque in Istanbul. And then I said, no, that would be going too far into fiction. So I said, no, that's not, at the end, well, he would just build a bridge.
And you give him a very good idea of the bridge he wants to build. Because, you write, he has understood that the work demanded of him is not a vertiginous footbridge, but the cement of a city, of the city of emperors and sultans, a military bridge, a commercial bridge, a religious bridge, a political bridge, a piece of urbanity, you write.
Yes, that's because that comes from Istanbul itself, not only from Michelangelo, but that's the idea, the problem of Istanbul. Still today is to cross these two immense rivers or seas, which are the Bosphorus from one side and the Golden Horn from the other. And the whole problematics of the city is how to manage to go from one side to another of this incredibly beautiful, scenic, but also difficult to cross triangle. And so it was so at that time, because at that time, the northern part of the Golden Horn was not totally urbanized as it is today. It was a part was a fortress, of which we have today the Galata Tower. It was no Genovese fortress of the 12th, 13th century. Then there was new establishments for the Jews, for example, which Bayezid took after the fall of Granada and installed into the Ottoman Empire and settled into the Ottoman Empire. And so there were newcomers in this new part of the city, but it was a suburb. It was not considered properly Istanbul. So the bridge was a way for the Sultan also to make the city cross the Golden Horn and be a little more what it is today. So that's why this description of the bridge, it comes more from Istanbul itself than from Michelangelo.
Now, the Pope is not very accurate in his salary, but when we read the book,
the Pope
the Sultan
doesn't pay well.
The Sultan doesn't pay well either.
The Sultan pays
Actually,
more.
The Sultan pays more, but in your book he's very dissatisfied, Michelangelo. He gets a kind of a paper, and what's on the paper, it's quite funny to discuss that here. He gets a present, and it is part of Bosnia.
Yes, he gets a village in Bosnia. And because, at that time...
How come? Explain that to us.
I can explain that. It's a bit forced, because usually those kinds of presents from the Sultan, that could be, the Spanish kings did the same with America, Like when you conquer some land, then you give you can give as a present some parts of that land to people you like or you want to honor, and that was the case with Bosnia, at that time.
So that's a fact. That's
It's
not
a
imagination.
fact. No, it's a fact, but it was quite impossible for Michelangelo. Why? Because Michelangelo was not part of the Ottoman system. He was neither a slave he was not a kul. That's the name of the slaves of the Sultan, who are the administration. He was not a high-born Muslim. He was not part of this system. So it's quite impossible that they would give him that at that time. But it was funny to imagine that somewhere around here there would be a village owned by Michelangelo.
So it was purely imaginative.
Yes.
Why did you take Bosnia? Why didn't you take the Netherlands?
Because at
for
that
instance?
time, there are reasons, not because I like Bosnia, which is true, but it's also the fact that at that time they were organizing the land system in Bosnia at the beginning of the 16th century.
Now, there There is this story about Michelangelo, and actually Michelangelo is having a good time in Constantinople, because he's got a friend. He's not very outgoing, but he's drinking sometimes, and he's meeting people.
No, well, Michelangelo doesn't drink. Michelangelo was a very severe and I don't know how to say. He worked a lot. He had very little leisure. He loved money and work, but he didn't drink, didn't eat too much. Was very strange guy.
But in your book, he's drinking and he's eating.
Once.
And he's also meeting someone, let's say someone, because it's not very clear from the beginning if it's a man or a woman. And you give this person a very important role in your book. You give him or her, I still don't know what to say, but let's say her, a voice. Why did you need this extra voice in your book?
The book is built with triangles. That's the structure I had in my mind when I began to write the novel. So there are like three main characters. Michelangelo himself, Messihi, the secretary of the Wazir, of the ministry, of the minister, and this third character, this voice in the dark. There are three religions, Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. There are three cities mentioned in the book, three voices: the voice of the narrator, myself, the voice of Michelangelo himself through the letters he writes to his family in Italy, and this voice that talks to Michelangelo in the dark. And also, this voice is a kind of, we don't know if it's a man or a woman. We don't know that.
What is it? Come on, tell us. You know.
I know. It's, you know, in Persian poetry or in Ottoman classical poetry, you have no he nor she. You have no gender. You don't know if a character is a male or a female. Those characters in the poetry serving wine can be men or women, or you don't know. Because they're all, and this whole tradition of Razal is also built on this possibility to be either male or female, or you don't know, an angel. So I wanted to have poetry represented that way in the book.
That's the reason.
And that's the reason why we don't know. She's the voice of Ottoman poetry, let's say. Mm.
Because you give the title to your book through the voice of this narrator. Actually, you make. I opt for a she. You give her voice. You say, for instance, your drunkenness is so sweet to me that it intoxicates me. That's the first, because she's lying there.
You know, that's. I copied this from a Persian poet. I think it's stealing. It's bad, but. Mm.
Well, we don't know that unless you tell us. So it's not a problem. Mm. I know that men are children who chase away their despair with anger, their fear with love. They respond to the void by building castles and temples. They cling to stories. They shove them in front of them like banners. Everyone makes some story his own, so as to attach himself to the crowd that shares it. You conquer people by telling them of battles, kings, elephants, and marvelous beings. That is the title. Why did you give it to the voice of this narrator?
You know, it's a strange story, this title. It was given to me like a present by a French writer whom I love, Pierre Michon. And it was, for me, it was like a kind of jewel someone gives to you on your birthday or something. So I I took this title. It's a verse from Rudyard Kipling. And I'm no real Kipling's fan, but nonetheless, the title, the two verses are great. Tell them of battle, kings and elephant. And I knew that someday I would use this title, you know, like you have something gave you like a magical object, and one day you have to use it. And I said, well, that's the moment. Because at the end, you know, this story, Tell Them of Battle, Kings and Elephant, Kipling says that he's in a village in India, and he has to spend the night in a very remote place near in the Bengal. And the people ask him, what do you do for a living? What's your job? And so he says, I'm a writer. So they tell him, oh, do you write for people who cannot write? You write for them. And he said, no, I write stories for children and also for grown-ups. And so the wise man of the village says, you know, because adults, grown-ups, are children, you have to tell them of battle, kings, and elephants. But because they're also grown-ups, you have to tell them about love and other important things. And this double bind of the writer, you know, you have to speak to the child inside us, but you have also to not to forget the grown-up and tell about love and politics. That's a bit the story of this book, of what's, at the end, what is art? Why do we write? Why do we tell stories? You know, and
yeah, actually, that is the big question, because I read it like that. The title is, we are living a very harsh life, and life is difficult, but we can ease it, we can make it more lovable, we can accept it better if we read and hear and tell stories. It helps us in our lives. Isn't that also how one can read the title?
yes, of course. No, that's the meaning. But it's also a way that to say that stories are not only here for diversion, they're also for pleasure or to forget our day-to-day life. No, they have also a very important link to philosophy, to politics, to something very, very, very more important that it could seem at first sight.
Of course, everybody wants to make a story which can be told of his or her own life. That's a question of identity. I think Michelangelo, in a way, is looking also for, who am I? What's my identity? He's here, I think, 31 years old.
Yes, but that's the character. I have to admit that's more fiction. At the end, I don't know Michelangelo. Never met him. But I think that's what traveling does to us. It's put us in a place where we have to ask about ourselves and where we are and what is our position in the world. And at the end, identity is always on the move, and it depends very much on what is around you. And you define yourself even in a very intimate way with what is around you and what surrounds you, the others that talk to you, how people see you, where you are, if you feel like you're a stranger. So that's with Michelangelo. And imagine yourself in the beginning of the 16th century where you have no images, no internet, no, even very, very few travel writings, for example. You don't know what is the city where you know where it is more or less, but you don't know what it looks like. You don't know languages. So probably for someone of the beginning of the 16th century, going to Constantinople was something very deep experience, you know, probably much more than can be today. And even today, traveling is something very violent at times.
Now, in your work, not only in this book, but also in Compass, for instance, you seem to be looking really for connections not only between East and West, but between people, between various parts of ourselves, various parts of the world. In the book, you suggest that the work of Michelangelo after his visit, his imaginary visit to Constantinople, integrates some of the styles of what he saw there into your work, into his work.
Of course, that was very interesting to read, to reread Michelangelo's work afterwards with the travel to Istanbul in sight. That means that if I was so sure that Michelangelo had traveled to Istanbul, then there was something left of it in his works. So I went looking for it, and there are things, there are so many things at the end. You know, for example, we know, that's what the specialist says, that for when he built a part of the dome of San Pietro in Rome, he was very influenced by Saint Sophia in Istanbul, because he saw the drawings and the maps that was taken there by an architect.
Sanam?
His name? No. No. It was not an Ottoman. It was an Italian. I forgot his name. So we know that there are possibilities that at the end the work of Michelangelo has contacts with the East. For example, there's one poem which we have as a manuscript in his own hand, which is signed Michelangelo in Turkey, Michelangelo in Turkey, you know. And it's a very harsh poem against the Pope and against. So he probably imagined himself as a Turk, you know, and in this poem, and signed it Michelangelo in Turkey. But so there are many things that you can reread Michelangelo's life and work.
If you want to see it.
If you want to see it, of course, yes.
There is also a very marvelous fragment in your book where Michelangelo goes for the first time to the Hagia Sophia, and he's really, this beauty which he sees there is really impressive. He cannot speak, he cannot move anymore. It is really like the first time he sees something like this. Yes, did you have the same experience?
But I had the same experience, but not as probably as strong as it would be for a young architect or sculptor of the beginning of the 16th century, because there was nothing like that by then in Italy or in Europe. It was very unique. And so afterwards, there will be like San Pietro, or many domes, very impressive. But at that time, they were not. So I probably think that for an artist at that time, the sights of Hagia Sophia would be something extraordinary, really. Unbelievable.
It still is, of course.
Of course, it still is, but we are more used to the power of architecture right now.
Yeah. I really want to speak a little bit about Compass before giving you the floor, actually, because Compass is a quite different book. The style is marvelous. It's a young musicologist from Austria, Franz Ritter, who can't sleep because he just heard that he is fatally ill, and he is thinking of his life, and is so marvelous. It's a tapestry of impressions, of genres, of feelings, of emotions, of anecdotes from his life. But it's in style completely different from the Battle book.
All my books are very different.
Yeah. I was wondering, the style of Compass, is that formed by all your readings of Arabic and Persian literature? Is that comparable? Did you, well, get any influence directly from
Of course, I'm very influenced by that. Probably more, but it's difficult to say. I don't know if the style itself is, but at times it's true that I use possibilities or genre from the Arabic classical prose, for example, what we call the maqama. It's a kind of short story, classical short story of about 1,000 years ago, where the style used is with rhyme. It's prose, but with rhyme and rhythm. And at time I play with that and use it, for example, in French, which sounds quite strange, with rhyme and rhymes in prose. But otherwise, it's very difficult because there's so different languages that it's very difficult to say if your style is really influenced by another language. I have more problems with Spanish, for example, that I am very totally contaminated by Spanish language and Catalan after so many years that my French is not totally correct at times. Use of prepositions is at times strange, but it's all right with me. I mean, it's my style at the end. It's my language. I can do what I want. So when the correctors tell me, well, maybe that's not really what we should write, and I don't know. They suggest that I change something. I say, no. And no, that's how I want it. And then the week afterwards, I have remorse and I said, no, let's change it. So, but it's true that with time we change, even our language changed. We grow old and fat, and I think my language too. My French is getting fat and grey, something like that. Much more classical.
I don't think so.
No, but much more classical than at the beginning, probably.
Are there any questions or remarks? Don't hesitate. Yes. I give you my... Oh, okay. Yeah. Why do you think Michelangelo's trip to Istanbul is unknown? Whether he went or not?
No, because as this historian said, we would know. What did he mean? What did he mean by that? He meant that for Leonardo da Vinci, for example, we have documents. We have Ottoman documents that say that he was invited, that tell about this drawing of a bridge. We have the drawing of the bridge itself. We know that Leonardo da Vinci was learning Turkish. We have, and in his own hand, Turkish letters, that he was writing the alphabet. He was learning the alphabet at that time. So we have many documents. The problem is with Michelangelo is that we have nothing, or almost nothing, outside what I can guess. But I'm no historian, I'm a novelist. So that's the reason why, I think.
I have one more question. What is the connection between all your books to you? what connects them to yourself as a person and a writer?
That's very different from one book to another. Let's say that they are always related to oneself, of course, because you write them. So when I write, it's me in a way, so they're always mine. But afterwards, there are some books are more related to my own life, as me as a character, for example. And this one is not. You know, because I'm very far from those characters of the beginning of the 16th century, for example. But he has a very deep relation to me too, because this passion I have for the classical Ottoman civilization, for Istanbul, but also for the Italian art is real. So it's also a very deep relationship to this book. And they're related to me in that way that I wrote them. And so every word of them is mine.
Except the one sentence from an Ottoman poem.
Yes, that's true. It was Persian, but except many sentences that I steal from many people and don't quote them, which is bad.
Whom can I give the floor? Yes, 2 questions over there.
Thank you very much for the very interesting talk, and I actually needed to smile when you were saying, oh, this is the first time that I'm reading the English translation of my work. So maybe you could say some words about your relationships to translation, because you've been translated in many other languages. You've stated that you have been working as a translator yourself, so maybe you can elaborate a bit on that. What's your impression? How does literature change in this process? Does it still feel yours? And do you maybe also read these translations if you know the languages? Maybe, yeah.
It's a very, very fascinating topic, the translation. Because, so to say, I recognize, for example, in the sample, I read that it's mine. I know this text, but it's like seeing it with very dark sunglasses. You know, something that you recognize it, but it's through a very strange filter. But I don't read. Usually, I don't read my translations. I don't read them aloud, but I don't read them at all. You know. Because there are many languages that I don't know, so I cannot read my Bosniak or Chinese or Hungary or Slovenian translation, for example. You know, it's just that I cannot. So it's quite frustrating. But you get books so they tell you, oh, that's your book translated, but you cannot even read your name on it. You know, at times. I had, for example, a Georgian translation arriving at my place of one of my books, and you say, that's me? But it's also like it's a great satisfaction to see that a book at the end, can travel much more than I do. I've never been to China, but I have a book, or to Japan, but I have a book translated in Japanese, and probably, I don't know, maybe people have read it in Japan. So it's incredible. Right now, last week, there was a presentation in Russia, in St. Petersburg, of my last novel, was just appeared in Russian, and in those times of war and the relations between France and Russia are not good at the moment. What should I explain to you? So it was very beautiful to see that. Nonetheless, there were people gathering one of my novels in St. Petersburg, and talking about it, discussing about it. That was great. And as the translation itself, I'm very lucky because I have great translators. And why? And how do I know that? Because I have great publishers. And I know that good publishing houses need good translators. So you can trust them. And at the end, translation is about trust. It's not my book anymore, it's, well, the translators. And what you read is not what I wrote, it's what someone else wrote. And it's fascinating, it's very interesting. Some translators ask questions, for example. Some don't. There are so many you don't know. You never heard nothing from them. No questions, no. You don't know them, just see the book at the end. But you imagine the person there. And for example, the Dutch version, my Dutch translator, Katrien, she asked a lot. I think that for this book, there was like, no, I don't know, hundreds of questions. Because she felt that she couldn't decide, you know, between two words, or that I should help her to decide. And it was also very interesting to work with her, even if I don't know Dutch at all. But I tried to explain to her what was meant with the words. So it's always a fascinating work with the translators.
There was another question. Yes.
Hi, good evening. My question is just following this imaginary scenario you invented. I'd like to know if by any chance this hypothetical or imaginary village in Bosnia that Michelangelo was given, was it ever named in the book? And if yes, what was the name? Or if not?
I didn't go that far.
No? Okay.
But I should have.
It would have been nice.
Yes, that's. But it's possible to see it at it's just draw. I'm sure that the historians have drawn a map at that time of how the divisions of the territory was and what kind of parcels were given to soldiers and things like that. So we can figure it out. I will write a short story about that. Yes.
Yes. It says Bosnia in the book. In the Dutch translation, it says Bosnia. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your wonderful talk, and I just want to say that I teach in the United States, and I teach Asian and Middle Eastern history, and I use your work in my class because I really tried to find somebody who understands the Middle East and can speak to the kind of toxic Islamic phobia that exists in the United States. And so, but, you know, again, taking the next critical step, I really want to ask, I mean, again, I love your work, but I want to take the critical question, like
yeah, of course.
the Edward Saïdian kind of temporal question.
Okay.
All right, I apologize. But
No, it's great. I love that moment. Let's have the same moment.
All right, I apologize, but what about your romanticizing the past?
Yes, it is. But no, I think this novel, for example, I'm not sure I would write it like that again today. For many reasons. One of them is probably that it is like a very romantic moment where I myself too thought that this kind of let's say, equidistant rereading of the past was possible. It was like kind of artistic gesture, call it romanticism, call it youth, call it poetry. But you're right, it's a kind of but what is a novel, actually, if not the possibility to rethink and examine the past in the eyes of the present within fiction? The novel is this space, precisely, of possibility to rebuild and to transform our world. A novel is a trap. It's a play with the reader. You know it's not real. But it's also a possibility to say, what if? And what if Michelangelo had seen the beauties of Istanbul? What if he had traveled there? Don't we need now this kind of possibility to think that our past is not closed to ourselves, that it's not closed, that there are no fixed borders between us and the other? I think that's what the novels are here for, too. And that I think it's very important that we have this possibility to imagine ourselves different, and our past, too. And that's the opportunity the novel gives us. I don't know if I'm making myself clear, but...
No, fantastic, thank you.
No, thank you.
Maybe a final question? No? Then, in that case, I have one final question.
Oh.
Because it struck me that there are very few female characters in your book. I found 3 very present female female travelers in Compass. Jane Digby, Lady Stanhope, and Anne-Marie Schatzenbach. But, well, I noticed that there are some very intelligent and wonderful young women here in Sarajevo, and I thought, what about these women? Where are they?
There are many women in my books. Usually, it's always... until now, I've not written in first person as a woman. Not yet. Probably I will someday. But when I say I, until now, it's been boys or men. But there are always female characters. You just quoted Compass. Compass is about a love story where the real important character of the book is the woman. It's Sarah. So my books wouldn't exist without the female characters. There would be no plot. They just wouldn't be there. Even if, and it's true, I don't write in the first stem as a woman. Not yet, but probably one day I will.
We'll be waiting for that. Thank you very much, MATHIAS ÉNARD.